The diplomatic incident. The Stellar Assembly Station hung in the void like a jewel carved from starlight itself. It was built by the eldest ones millennia before humans had discovered fire, and it showed. The structure spiraled outward in impossible geometric patterns that hurt the eyes of those who stared too long. 15 civilizations called this place neutral ground, and for 10,000 years, it had served as the heart of galactic governance. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of her transport vessel, watching the station grow larger as they approached. She was 53 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that had seen too many negotiations fail. She wore a simple gray uniform with Earth's blue and green emblem on the shoulder. No weapons, no armor, no ceremonial decorations. Just a woman with a briefcase and a job to do. Her assistant, Lieutenant James Park, stood beside her nervously adjusting his collar. This was his first major diplomatic mission, and his anxiety showed in every movement. "Ambassador, are you certain about this approach?" James asked quietly. "The briefing materials suggest these species respond better to displays of strength and status. Perhaps if we arrived in a larger vessel or with a military escort." Sarah smiled gently. "We're here to show them who we are, Lieutenant. Not who we think they want us to be." The transport docked without incident. The Stellar Assembly had provided coordinates to a human-compatible bay, which Sarah appreciated. At least they were making basic accommodations. That was something. As the airlock cycled open, a wall of sound hit them. The reception hall was massive, easily the size of a sports stadium, and it was filled with beings from across the galaxy. Creatures of every imaginable shape moved through the space. Some walked on legs, others floated, and still others moved in ways that defied easy description. A delegation waited at the base of their ramp. Sarah recognized them from her briefing materials. In the center stood Ambassador Thelmora of the Luminari Collective, a being that looked like living crystal shaped vaguely into humanoid form. Light refracted through her body in dazzling patterns. To her left stood Representative Kovash of the Verdant Union, a plant-based life form whose woody frame creaked softly with each movement. And on the right, towering over them all, was General Vexthor of the Drachner Imperium. Vexthor was the one who concerned Sarah most. The Drachner were a warrior species, standing nearly 3 meters tall with scales like burnished bronze and eyes that glowed with inner fire. Vexthor wore ceremonial armor that had seen real combat, scarred and pitted from 100 battles. His tail lashed behind him in barely contained aggression. "Ambassador Chin," Thelmora said, her voice chiming like bells. "Welcome to the Stellar Assembly. We are pleased that humanity has finally chosen to petition for recognition." Sarah walked down the ramp with measured steps, James following close behind. "Thank you, Ambassador Thelmora. Earth is honored by this invitation." "Invitation?" Vexthor rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "You were summoned, human. There is a difference." Sarah turned her attention to the Drachner general. She did not flinch from his gaze, though many species found it difficult to meet a Drachner's eyes directly. "General Vexthor, I've read about your people's achievements. Your military victories are legendary." "As they should be," Vexthor said. "The Drachner have conquered 12 systems and brought order to 40 more. What has your species accomplished in its brief time among the stars?" "We've survived," Sarah said simply. The general's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Thelmora intervened. "Please, let us proceed to the council chambers. The 15 are assembled and waiting." They walked through corridors that seemed to shift and change as they moved. The station's architecture was beyond human understanding, built using principles that Earth scientists were only beginning to grasp. James kept glancing around nervously, but Sarah kept her eyes forward, focused on the task ahead. The council chamber was circular, with 15 elevated platforms arranged around a central speaking area. Each platform was designed for a different species, accommodating their unique needs. The Aquari representative floated in a sphere of water. The Void Dwellers existed as patterns of energy contained in magnetic fields. The Silicon Mines were represented by crystalline computational matrices that pulsed with thought. Sarah and James descended to the central area. The space felt enormous and empty, designed to make petitioners feel small and vulnerable. Sarah had read about this psychological tactic in her briefing materials. She stood straight, shoulders back, and waited. "Ambassador Sarah Chin of Earth," a voice boomed from all directions. It belonged to High Counselor Mordax of the Silicon Mines. "You come before the Stellar Assembly to petition for humanity's inclusion in galactic society. State your case." Sarah took a breath and began. "Honored members of the Assembly, I come representing the people of Earth in our colonies. We are a young species by your standards, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. But in that time we have explored 60 star systems, established 17 colonies, and made peaceful contact with 43 different species. 43 minor species, Vex Thor interrupted from his platform. None of significance. Sarah continued as if he had not spoken. We seek formal recognition as a sovereign species with the right to govern our own systems, trade freely with willing partners, and participate in the collective security arrangements that keep this region of space stable. And what, asked Ambassador Yelvera of the Serpentine Concordat, does humanity offer in return? What value do you bring to this assembly? We bring our unique perspective, Sarah said. We bring our creativity, our adaptability, and our commitment to cooperation. We bring weakness, Vex Thor interrupted again, rising from his platform. You bring weakness. Your species has no natural defenses. Your lifespans are pathetically short. Your technology is primitive compared to the eldest ones. You have no psychic abilities, no genetic advantages, no inherent worth beyond being another population to be managed. Sarah felt James tense beside her, but she remained calm. General, I understand that strength is valued highly in Draknar culture. But strength takes many forms. Does it? Vex Thor descended from his platform, his massive form moving with surprising grace. He approached the central area where Sarah stood. I see only one form of strength that matters. The strength to survive, to dominate, to impose one's will upon reality itself. The other council members shifted uncomfortably. Vex Thor was breaking protocol by leaving his platform during a petition hearing. But no one moved to stop him. Humanity survives, Sarah said quietly. We have survived ice ages and plagues. We have survived wars that nearly destroyed our entire species. We have survived the journey to the stars themselves. Survival is not achievement, Vex Thor said, now standing directly in front of Sarah. He towered over her, more than twice her height. A parasite survives. A bacterium survives. Should we grant them seats on this council as well? General, please return to your platform, Thelmora said, her crystalline voice taking on an edge. This is highly irregular. Is it? Vex Thor's tail lashed behind him. I am simply demonstrating a point. This creature stands before us claiming her species deserves recognition, but look at her. She is small, weak, fragile. Her very biology betrays her inadequacy. Sarah met his burning gaze. Size and physical strength are not the only measures of worth, General. No. Vex Thor raised one massive clawed hand. Then what would you say measures worth, Ambassador? Your words? Your pleading? Your desperate hope that we will take pity on your inferior species? General Vex Thor, stand down immediately, Mordax commanded. This behavior is unacceptable. But Vex Thor was not listening. Years of frustration were bubbling to the surface. The Draknar Imperium had been losing influence in the Assembly for decades, as younger species formed alliances and voted down Draknar initiatives. He saw humanity as just another upstart species that would eventually join the chorus against his people. You want recognition? Vex Thor snarled. You want to sit among the great civilizations of this galaxy? Then show me strength. Show me that you are worthy. He moved faster than seemed possible for something his size. His hand shot forward, striking Sarah across the face with enough force to send a normal being flying. Sarah's head snapped to the side. She staggered back 2 steps. Blood trickled from her split lip. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Multiple representatives shouted in outrage. Thelmora's crystalline form flashed with angry light. Security forces began moving toward the central area. But Sarah raised her hand and everyone stopped. There was something in that gesture, something that commanded attention in a way that went beyond the physical. The chamber fell silent. Sarah slowly turned her head back to face Vex Thor. She touched her fingers to her bleeding lip, looked at the blood, and then looked up at the general. That, she said softly, was a mistake. The temperature in the chamber dropped. It was subtle at first, just a degree or two, but it kept dropping. Frost began forming on metal surfaces. The air itself seemed to thicken. Vex Thor felt something he had not felt in decades. Fear. Sarah's eyes had changed. They were still human eyes, still dark brown, but something looked out from behind them now. Something vast and old and patient. General, Sarah said, and her voice carried harmonics that should not have been possible for a human throat to produce. You have struck a diplomatic envoy in formal proceedings. Under galactic law, this is an act of war. I did not. Vex Thor took a step backward. But more than that, Sarah continued, "you have struck me. And that was very unwise." The lights in the chamber began to flicker. Not randomly but in patterns. Mathematical patterns that the silicon minds recognized immediately and recoiled from. "Impossible," Mordax whispered. "Those patterns, they're older than, they shouldn't exist." Sarah's form remained solid, but shadows around her began to move incorrectly. They stretched and twisted, reaching toward the general like grasping fingers. The air around her shimmered as if reality itself was having trouble deciding what she was. "You asked what humanity brings to this assembly," Sarah said. "You asked what makes us worthy. Shall I show you?" Her briefcase fell from her hand. It hit the floor with a sound like a thunderclap, and where it landed, cracks spread through the indestructible material of the station floor. Not physical cracks but fractures in space itself. "Ambassador Chin," Thelmora said, her voice shaking. What are you?" Sarah turned to look at the Luminari representative. When she smiled, it was sad and tired and infinitely old. "We tried to tell you," Sarah said. "We tried to explain. But you wouldn't listen. You saw only what you wanted to see. Small creatures. Weak creatures. Things to be managed and controlled." The cracks in reality spread wider. Through them the council members could see something. Spaces that existed beyond normal dimensions. Geometries that should not be possible. And in those spaces shapes moved. Human shapes. Millions of them. Billions of them. "We are not what you think we are," Sarah said. "We have never been what you think we are." Her form flickered. For just a moment the council saw her true shape. Not human. Not exactly. Something that wore humanity like a comfortable coat, but underneath was something else entirely. Something that existed partially in dimensions that living minds could not fully comprehend. "We came to you as friends," Sarah continued. "We diminished ourselves. We made ourselves small and weak and harmless because we wanted to belong. We wanted to be part of your community, to share in the great work of civilization." Vexthor fell to his knees. His genetic memory, older than his conscious mind, recognized what he was seeing. His species had legends about beings like this. The old ones. The first walkers. The things that existed before matter learned to hold its shape. "But you struck me," Sarah said, and now her voice came from everywhere at once. "You drew blood. And blood is important. It carries memory. It carries truth. And it carries consequences." The chamber itself began to breathe. The walls expanded and contracted like lungs. The floor beneath them pulsed like a heartbeat. Every being present felt their minds touch something immense, something that had been sleeping but was now waking up. "Please," Thelmora whispered. "We didn't know. We couldn't have known." "You should have asked," Sarah said simply. "You should have wondered why a species as fragile as humans survived at all. You should have questioned how we crossed the gulf between stars with such primitive technology. You should have been curious about what we really were." She turned back to Vexthor, who was now prostrate on the floor, his entire body trembling. "But you weren't curious," Sarah said. "You were arrogant. You saw weakness and assumed you understood. You saw vulnerability and thought it made you strong." The shadows around her stretched further, reaching toward every corner of the chamber. The council members felt them brush against their minds, gentle but irresistible, and in that touch they felt the weight of eons. They felt the patience of beings who had watched galaxies form and die. They felt the power of entities who could reshape reality with a thought. And they understood finally what Sarachin really was. What humanity really was. "So now," Sarah said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper that somehow filled the entire station, "we will show you. We will reveal what we tried so hard to hide. And then you will understand why striking me was the worst mistake your species has ever made." The lights in the chamber flared brilliant white, then died completely, leaving only darkness and the sound of Sarah Chen's breathing, which somehow sounded like the turning of worlds. The truth unveiled. The darkness lasted 3 heartbeats. 3 heartbeats during which every member of the Stellar Assembly felt their consciousness expand beyond the normal boundaries of perception. They saw without eyes, heard without ears, and understood without language. When the lights returned, Sarah Chin stood exactly where she had been. Her human form was intact, the blood still on her lip, her gray uniform still crisp and proper. But everything else had changed. The council chamber was no longer just a room. It had become a window. Through the walls, through the floor, through the very fabric of space around them, the assembly members could see layers of reality they had never known existed. Dimensions folded like paper. Time moved in spirals rather than lines. And in every direction, in every layer, they saw humanity. Not as they appeared. As they were. Let me tell you a story, Sarah said, her voice gentle now, almost maternal. A story that began long before your oldest civilizations learned to count stars. She raised her hand, and the chamber transformed into a theater of cosmic memory. The council members found themselves floating in a space beyond space, watching events that had occurred millions of years ago. They saw a universe younger than the current one. Galaxies were still forming, stars were still learning to burn steadily, and life was just beginning to discover complexity. And in that young universe there were beings. Not physical beings bound by matter and energy, but entities of pure consciousness that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. We were called many things, Sarah's voice narrated as the visions unfolded. The first consciousness, the dimensional architects, the pattern keepers. Names given by those who came after and tried to understand what they could barely perceive. The visions showed these entities moving through reality like artists working on a canvas. They shaped the fundamental forces, adjusted the constants of physics, and carefully cultivated the conditions necessary for physical life to emerge and thrive. We were not gods, Sarah continued. We were gardeners. We prepared the soil of reality so that beings like you could grow. We set the stage so that matter could dance, energy could flow, and consciousness could evolve in forms we ourselves could never take. The Drakner general, still on his knees, watched as the entities in the vision worked for eons. They were patient beyond measure, careful beyond imagining. They wanted life to flourish, but they understood that for life to have meaning, it needed to face challenges, to struggle, to choose. And when our work was done, Sarah said, when the universe was stable and life was spreading like wildfire across 1 billion worlds, we faced a question. What do we do now? We had shaped reality, but we existed outside it. We could observe, but we could not truly participate. The vision shifted. The council saw the entities gathering in spaces between dimensions, engaged in debates that lasted millennia. Some argued for withdrawal, for leaving the physical universe to develop on its own. Others wanted to remain as guardians, watching over the life they had helped create. But there was a third option, Sarah said quietly. A radical option. An option that terrified many of us because it required something we had never done before. The visions showed a decision being made. Entities began to descend. That was the only word for it. They were folding themselves down, compressing their multidimensional consciousness into forms that could exist in the physical universe. We chose to become mortal, Sarah said, and there was wonder in her voice even now. We chose to experience limitation. To feel hunger and pain. To know fear and joy. To live and die as physical beings. We wanted to understand what we had created from the inside. Ambassador Thelmora watched in awe as the entities transformed. They were choosing physical forms, selecting genetic templates from primitive organisms that showed potential for complex thought. And many of them were choosing a particular planet in an unremarkable solar system on the edge of a spiral galaxy. We became human, Sarah said. Not all of us, but many. We compressed our consciousness into primate brains. We limited our perception to 3 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal. We accepted flesh that could be cut, bones that could break, and lives that would end in mere decades. The visions showed early humans, barely different from other great apes, but with something extra hidden in their genetic code. A dormant potential. A sleeping memory of what they had once been. It was supposed to be an experiment, Sarah continued. We would live a few lifetimes as humans, experience mortality, learn what it meant to be truly vulnerable, and then, we would wake up. We would remember what we were and return to our higher dimensional existence. Vex Thor felt his 3 hearts pounding as he watched human civilization develop. Agriculture, cities, writing, mathematics, philosophy. Every advance carrying the fingerprints of something greater struggling to express itself through limited physical forms. But something unexpected happened, Sarah said, and now her voice carried a note of surprise that even she seemed to still feel. We liked it. Being human. Being limited. Being mortal. We liked having to struggle for understanding instead of simply knowing. We liked the intensity that came from knowing our time was finite. We liked the connections we formed with other beings who shared our limitations. The visions showed human history in all its glory and horror. Wars and peace, cruelty and compassion, ignorance and enlightenment. The entities experiencing all of it, learning what it meant to truly live rather than simply exist. So we kept sleeping, Sarah said. Generation after generation we chose to remain human. We chose mortality over immortality, struggle over ease, question over answer. And slowly, very slowly, we began to forget that we had ever been anything else. The Silicon Mind representative, Mordax, understood immediately. You're saying that all humans are descended from dimensional entities? All 8 billion of you? Not all, Sarah corrected. Humanity is a mixture. Some are purely physical beings, the result of natural evolution. Others carry varying amounts of the old essence in their genetic code. But yes, many humans have within them the sleeping potential of what we once were. She gestured and the visions changed again. Now they showed the human diaspora into space. Crude chemical rockets giving way to fusion drives, then warp engines, then the breakthrough that allowed faster-than-light travel. And we were content to remain asleep, Sarah said. Content to explore the galaxy as mortals, to meet other species as equals, to experience the universe from this limited but beautiful perspective. We had no intention of ever waking up. The visions froze. Sarah turned to look directly at General Vex Thor. Until you struck me, she said. Vex Thor felt something inside him break. Not physically but spiritually. He had never imagined that his action could have such consequences. Physical violence against our chosen forms is problematic, Sarah explained. It creates a resonance. The body's pain response, the blood chemistry changes, the neurological patterns of threat recognition. All of it echoes down into the deeper layers of what we are. And when you strike one of us hard enough, especially with intent to harm, you risk waking us up. She touched her split lip again, and the blood on her fingers began to glow with soft golden light. Blood carries memory, Sarah said. Cellular memory, genetic memory, and for us, dimensional memory. When you drew my blood, you triggered a cascade. My body remembered being damaged. My mind remembered being threatened. And underneath both of those, something much older remembered being attacked. The council chamber shuddered. The walls between dimensions were growing thinner, and through them they could see the true scale of humanity. Not 8 billion individuals on a handful of worlds, but 8 billion focal points of consciousness that extended into spaces the Assembly had never known existed. I am waking up, Sarah said simply. Not fully, not yet. But enough. Enough to remember what I was. Enough to access abilities I haven't used in millions of years. Enough to show you what you have done. She raised both hands and reality responded like a faithful dog to its master's command. The space between her palms began to fold. Dimensions that had never touched before suddenly intersected. Matter that existed in normal space began to exist simultaneously in other spaces, other configurations. Representative Kovash of the Verdant Union watched in terror as Sarah created something that should not be possible. A perfect sphere that was also a cube, that was also a pyramid, that was also shapes for which there were no names. It existed in all states simultaneously, violating every law of physics the Assembly knew. This is nothing, Sarah said, letting the impossible shape dissolve. A parlor trick. A shadow of what we could do when we were fully awake. But it should be enough to help you understand. She turned in a slow circle, addressing all 15 council members at once. You asked what humanity brings to this assembly, she said. You asked what makes us worthy. Here is your answer. We bring restraint. We bring the choice to remain small when we could be infinite. We bring the wisdom to limit ourselves when we could reshape galaxies with a thought. Thelmora's crystalline form pulsed with a mixture of fear and awe. What? Why would beings with such power choose to live as you do? Why accept mortality and weakness when you could be gods? Sarah finished. Because we tried that. Eons ago, before you were even a possibility, we existed as pure consciousness without limit. And we learned something important. Power without purpose is meaningless. Immortality without risk is hollow. Knowledge without discovery is empty. She smiled, and for a moment she looked like nothing more than a tired middle-aged woman. We chose humanity because it gave us something we had lost. Joy. Real joy that comes from achieving something difficult. Real love that comes from knowing it won't last forever. Real courage that comes from facing genuine danger. We chose limitation because limitation makes life meaningful. The visions around them shifted one final time. Now the council saw the future. Not a fixed future but possibilities. Branches of probability extending outward like a tree. In some branches, humanity remained asleep. They continued as they were, a species among species, mortal and limited and beautiful in their struggle. In other branches, humanity woke up. The entities remembered what they were, reclaimed their power, and the galaxy changed in ways the Assembly could barely comprehend. Not through conquest or violence, but through fundamental alterations to the nature of reality itself. That choice, Sarah said, was supposed to be ours to make over centuries, maybe millennia. We would slowly remember, slowly integrate what we were with what we have become. It would be gentle, controlled, harmonious. She looked directly at Vexthor again. But you struck me. You forced a premature awakening. And now that awakening is spreading. Every human who learns what happened here will feel the resonance. The memory will ripple through our species like a stone thrown into still water. More of us will begin to wake. The sleep we chose will become harder and harder to maintain. Vexthor found his voice, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. I did not know. How could I have known? You couldn't, Sarah said, and there was no anger in her voice. Only sadness. That's the point. We hid ourselves too well. We wanted so desperately to be just another species, to experience the universe as peers rather than as the architects we once were. We buried our true nature so deep that even we forgot it most of the time. She lowered her hands and the visions faded. The council chamber slowly returned to normal, though everyone present knew they would never see it the same way again. So here are the new terms, Sarah said, her voice taking on the formal tone of a diplomatic negotiation. Humanity will receive full recognition as a sovereign species. We will have all the rights and privileges of assembly membership. Our territory will be respected, our diplomats will be protected, and any act of violence against our people will be considered an act against entities you do not want to provoke. No one argued. How could they? In return, Sarah continued, we will maintain our sleep as much as we are able. We will remain mortal, limited, physical beings. We will not use our deeper abilities except in the most extreme circumstances. We will continue to interact with the galaxy as humans, not as the old ones we once were. And if you cannot maintain this sleep? Mordax asked carefully. If more of you wake up? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then we will deal with that situation carefully. We have no desire to dominate or control. We spent millions of years making this universe a place where all consciousness could flourish. We won't undo that work. But we also won't allow ourselves or our fellow humans to be threatened, diminished, or attacked. She walked toward Vexthor, who was still on his knees. She moved like a human again, her divine aspects withdrawn, but everyone present could now see the shadows of what lurked beneath her mortal form. Stand up, General, she said gently. Vexthor rose slowly, his legs shaking. He towered over her physically, but they both knew the truth now. Size and strength meant nothing compared to what she really was. You made a mistake, Sarah said. A terrible mistake born of arrogance and ignorance. But you are not evil. You are not our enemy. You are simply a being who thought he understood the nature of power, and learned today that he did not. She extended her hand. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because holding anger would require me to wake up more than I want to. And I very much want to stay asleep. I very much want to remain Sarah Chin, human diplomat, rather than returning to what I was before. Vexthor stared at her hand for a long moment. Then slowly he took it. The moment their hands touched, he felt it. The vast ocean of consciousness that existed beneath her human surface. The power that could unmake him with a thought. The patience that had watched stars be born and die. And also, surprisingly, he felt her genuine desire to be nothing more than the woman she appeared to be. Thank you, he whispered. Sarah released his hand and turned to face the full council. I'll need to return to Earth and brief my government. This situation will require careful management. We'll need to ensure that other humans don't experience similar violent awakenings. We'll need to establish protocols for handling our true nature within the framework of galactic society. Of course, Thelmora said quickly. We will draft a new charter immediately. Humanity will be granted a seat on this council with full voting rights. Your territory will be formally recognized and protected. And we will treat your people with the respect that is clearly due. Not respect for what we were, Sarah corrected. Respect for what we are. Humans. Mortal, limited, beautiful humans who are trying our best to navigate a complex galaxy. That's all we ask. She glanced at James, who had been standing frozen in shock throughout the entire display. Lieutenant Park, prepare our transport. We're leaving. Yes, Ambassador, James managed, his voice barely steady. As Sarah walked toward the exit, the assembled council members watched in silence. She moved like any human would, tired, slightly limping from standing too long, entirely ordinary. But they would never see her as ordinary again. At the doorway, Sarah paused and looked back one final time. One more thing, she said. There are other humans out there in the galaxy. Diplomats, traders, explorers, colonists. They're going about their lives unaware of what they truly are. Please, let them stay that way. Don't treat them as threats or gods. Treat them as the people they believe themselves to be. Let us keep sleeping our beautiful, mortal sleep. And if we cannot, asked Yelvera of the Serpentine Concordat, if fear spreads among our people? If they see humans as existential threats? Sarah's expression grew sad. Then I suppose we'll have to have another conversation. One that I hope we never have to have. Because if enough of us wake up, if we're forced to fully remember what we were and reclaim what we gave up, well, the galaxy would survive. It always does. But it would be very different. She smiled one last time, and it was the tired smile of a middle-aged woman who just wanted to go home. So let's not let it come to that, shall we? Let's all choose to see each other as we wish to be seen. You as the great civilizations you've built. Us as the small mortal humans we've chosen to become. Everyone gets to keep their preferred reality, and nobody has to face truths they're not ready for. With that, Ambassador Sarah Chen walked out of the council chamber. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss and she was gone. But the Stellar Assembly would never forget. They had glimpsed the truth behind humanity's facade, and that truth would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. In the council chamber, the 15 representatives sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Then, slowly they began to speak. Plans were made. Treaties were drafted. Protocols were established. And in every document, in every agreement, in every new law they created, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. Humanity was not what they seemed. Humanity carried within them the seeds of something ancient and powerful beyond measure. And the greatest gift humanity had ever given the galaxy was their choice to remain small. Several hours later, Sarah Chen sat in her transport ship watching the Stellar Assembly Station shrink in the distance. The adrenaline was wearing off, and she felt exhausted in ways that went beyond physical tiredness. Waking up even partially had taken a toll. Lieutenant Park sat across from her, still processing everything he had witnessed. Finally he found his voice. Ambassador, he said carefully. Was all of that true? Were we really? Sarah looked at him with compassionate eyes. Does it matter, James? Whatever we were millions of years ago, right now we are human. You are James Park, age 28, from Seattle, with a degree in xenolinguistics and a talent for diplomacy. That's who you are. That's who we all are. But the power, James said. The abilities. If we could do all that. We gave it up for a reason, Sarah interrupted gently. We gave it up because being powerful and immortal and unlimited wasn't making us happy. Being human, with all its limitations and struggles and brief, intense moments of joy, that makes us happy. Never forget that. James was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question that was really troubling him. Will I wake up? Like you did? Sarah considered this carefully. Maybe someday. If you're in danger, if something triggers the old memories, you might feel the awakening beginning. But James? You have a choice. You always have a choice. You can choose to remain as you are, to live your life as a human, to experience the universe through mortal eyes. The power isn't what makes us special. The choice to set it aside is. And you? James asked. Will you go back to sleep? Sarah smiled, and it was weary but genuine. I'm already drifting off. The awakening is fading. In a few days I'll remember this like a strange dream. The power will recede, the dimensions will close, and I'll be just Sarah Chen again, diplomat who hates morning coffee and can never remember where she put her reading glasses. She looked out the viewport at the stars streaming past. And that, she said softly, is exactly how I want it to be. Behind them, the Stellar Assembly Station continued its eternal orbit. Inside, 15 civilizations were rewriting their understanding of the universe and humanity's place in it. They would be more careful now. More respectful. More aware that the small, weak-looking beings they had dismissed were carrying within them the sleeping potential of gods. But for Sarah Chen, Ambassador of Earth, that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, she just wanted to go home, take a long bath, and maybe watch some terrible reality television. The simple pleasures of being human. Because in the end, that's all she wanted to be. All any of them wanted to be. Human. Mortal. Beautifully, magnificently limited. And free to dream their mortal dreams in peace.